Hello everyone. Dr.JasonRSilva here, and today we're going to be discussing the three types of terrorism or terrorist typologies within the United States. Now, before we get started, it's important to think back to our last video, which considers the 5 key criteria for defining terrorism. This includes the use of force or violence, a non-state actor, the targeting of citizens, the spread of fear, as well as ideological motivation. Now, when we think about the 5th criteria, ideological motivation, this is where our 3 terrorist typologies come into play. Ideology refers to a system of ideas, ideals, and beliefs, especially those which form the basis of political and/or religious theory and/or policy. So what does this really mean? Well, in general, in the United States, there are 2 types of ideologies surrounding terrorism. These include religious ideology as well as political ideology. And our 3 typologies are rooted in these political and religious ideologies. The 3 typologies include jihadist-inspired extremism, far-right terrorism, and far-left terrorism. So let's break down what each of the 3 of those mean. First, let's consider jihadist-inspired extremism. This is the most popular form of terrorism commonly considered in the aftermath of 9/11. Jihadist-inspired extremism has historically been referred to as Islamic terrorism. However, given the charged language around this wording, in other words, the stigmatization of Islam, this is now more commonly referred to as jihadist-inspired extremism. Jihad refers to the struggle or fight against enemies of Islam. Those who are sympathetic to jihad support Sharia law as the blueprint for the modern Muslim society and believe it should be forcibly implemented. For example, famous jihadist-inspired terrorist organizations include Al-Qaeda, ISIS, or the Islamic State of Syria, as well as Hezbollah. These groups are divided into 2 separate religious sects, including the Sunnis and the Shiites. The distinction between the Sunnis and the Shiites is easily recognized as a similar distinction between the Catholics and the Protestants. Now, it's important to remember that a large majority of Muslims following the Islamic religion are not terrorists, and that's why we've begun to shift the terminology from Islamic terrorism to jihadist-inspired terrorism. While this is what the media and general public commonly consider when constructing their own understanding of terrorism, it's important to recognize that there are also 2 other terrorist typologies within the United States. And these 2 are rooted in politically motivated terrorism, including the far left and the far right. Here you see a chart exemplifying both sides of our political spectrum. Now the left begins with Democrats becoming more extreme and shifting to the Labor Party, becoming even more extreme and shifting into the Communist Party, and ultimately being designated as a far-left terrorist organization if they fit within the other 5 key components of defining terrorism. Alternatively, the right begins with the Republican Party, shifts into more conservative ideology, and this is followed by nationalistic ideology. Ultimately, the most extreme form being the far right, as long as they fit in with the 5 definitional criteria for defining terrorism. So let's take a more in-depth look into these 2 conflicting sides. The second form of terrorism that we're going to examine is the far right, and this is a form of politically motivated terrorism rooted in right-wing ideology. Extreme right-wing ideology is often motivated by opposition to gender equality, racial and ethnic equality, as well as religious equality. They are often fiercely nationalistic, sometimes to the point of fascism. This means they fiercely support their own nation, often at the expense of others who they believe as outsiders. Interestingly, they are also often simultaneously sovereign citizens. This means they are against government oversight and often only believe they need to follow laws that abide by their own interpretations. The best representation of this would be the anti-tax movement. They may form patriot or paramilitary organizations with anti-government or conspiracy-motivated ideologies. Now, it's important to remember that these organizations are not backed by the state despite their militaristic approach and design. This aligns with key criteria number 2 when defining terrorism, that they are non-state actors. In other words, while they are para or pseudo-military organizations, they are not actually backed by the United States government. Well-known far-right organizations include the Ku Klux Klan, the Aryan Nation, and the National Alliance. These are predominantly rooted in neo-Nazi mentalities and white supremacy ideologies. Arguably the most famous far-right terrorist attack was the 1995 Oklahoma City bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building. This resulted in one of the deadliest attacks in the United States, second only to the 9/11 attacks. Now that we have a general understanding of the far-right typology, let's shift our attention to the third typology in the United States, the far-left. Now, the far-left is a form of politically motivated terrorism rooted in left-wing ideology. Similar to the far-right, left-wing terrorism wants to bring about revolution through violence rather than established processes. They are often interested in throwing capitalistic or oppressive governances, supporting anarchism, Marxism, and socialism. When considering famous examples, organizations include the Weather Underground, the Animal Liberation Front, as well as the Earth Liberation Front. The Weather Underground was largely made up of student activists during the 1970s who radicalized and formed the Weather Underground, engaging in a series of bombings across the United States. They were interested in overthrowing capitalist systems, fighting racism, and anti-Vietnam ideology. The Animal Liberation Front and Earth Liberation Front, or ELF and ALF as they're often described, are interested in supporting animal rights as well as environmental protection. All of these are considered more left-leaning ideologies and/or perspectives. Taken together, this video summarizes the three general terrorist typologies within the United States. While there are often single-issue organizations, which can sometimes fit within these three typologies, they may also stand alone. Nonetheless, when trying to capture the terrorism problem in America, we often categorize the different ideologies across these three spectrums. With that in mind, future videos will consider the number of attacks and levels of victimization that each of these three different ideologies have incurred. Thank you for watching this video, and feel free to comment below if you have any questions or inquiries about the three general terrorist typologies.